Think about the last time you were in a forest. Maybe it was a camping trip or just a hike on a marked trail on a Sunday afternoon. Do you remember the sound? The rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the distant call of birds. The woods are always broadcasting a frequency of life. But I want you to imagine a specific moment. A moment that seasoned survivalists and elite search and rescue officers actively dread. It is a phenomenon informally known as the Oz effect. Imagine you are walking on the trail. You step over a root and suddenly, the broadcast stops. The wind dies completely. The leaves freeze. The birds go completely unnaturally silent. The air pressure drops so fast it makes your eardrums pop. And in that heavy, suffocating silence, the primal reptilian part of your brain sends a massive surge of adrenaline directly into your blood. Your brain is telling you something that your eyes haven't realized yet. You are no longer the observer. You are being observed. You have just crossed the invisible boundary into a dead zone. If you are lying in bed right now, pull the covers up. Because tonight we are looking at the classified, sealed files of the American National Park Service. Welcome to Prince of Darkness. The United States holds over 85 million acres of protected wilderness. We treat these parks like massive outdoor museums. We build visitor centers, pave roads, and sell souvenirs. We have created a comforting illusion that because we put a boundary line on a map, we have tamed the ancient Earth. But the Earth is not tame. Since the National Park Service was established, tens of thousands of people have vanished within their borders. Most are found. They get lost, they succumb to the elements, or they suffer a fatal fall. These are tragedies, but they are logical. They follow the laws of physics and geography. But there is a secondary list, a highly classified subset of disappearances that are kept strictly out of the media. These are the cases that defy spatial geometry. Cases where tracking dogs refuse to follow a scent. Cases where people vanish in the literal blink of an eye, only to be found in locations that are physically impossible to reach. Tonight, we dissect the anatomy of the impossible. We are opening the files of the grid breakers. To understand how terrifying these specific cases are, you first need to understand how elite modern search and rescue actually is. When a person goes missing in a national park, the response is military in its precision. Within hours, a grid is established. Helicopters equipped with FLIR, forward-looking infrared cameras, take to the sky, capable of detecting the body heat of a rabbit from 1,000 feet up. Bloodhounds and cadaver dogs, animals with a sense of smell tens of thousands times more sensitive than humans, are deployed at the point last seen. Hundreds of trained volunteers form human chains, walking shoulder to shoulder through the brush. If you are out there, they will find you. They will find a footprint, a discarded candy wrapper, a thread of a jacket snagged on the thorn, or the scent of your adrenaline on the wind. But what happens when the grid yields absolutely zero data? What happens when a human being simply ceases to exist on the physical plane? Our first classified dive takes us to Yosemite National Park. It is a crown jewel of American nature, famous for its massive granite cliffs, ancient giant sequoias, and deep, lush valleys. But Yosemite has a dark underbelly, a history of disappearances clustered around massive boulder fields and deep woods. The file we are opening tonight is simply labeled Incident 44, The Ledge. It was a Tuesday in late August 2019. The summer crowds were beginning to thin out. A family of four, a father, a mother, a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old boy named Leo were having a picnic in a highly populated open meadow near the base of the tree line. The weather was pristine, 72 degrees, zero cloud cover. There were at least 20 other families scattered across the sprawling green space. It was the safest environment imaginable. At 1:15 p.m., the mother realized they had forgotten the juice boxes in the car, which was parked about 50 yards away in the designated lot. The father was packing up the sandwich wrappers. The daughter was reading a book on the blanket. Leo, the 4-year-old, was sitting exactly 6 feet from his father, playing with a plastic toy truck in the short grass. The father looked down at his phone to check a text message from his boss. We all do this. It is a universal human action. You look away for a fraction of a second. According to the psychological profile and timeline reconstructed by federal investigators, the father's eyes were off his son for exactly 18 seconds. 18 seconds. When the father looked up, Leo was gone. Now put yourself in that father's mind. The initial feeling isn't terror, it's annoyance. You assume the child stood up and walked behind the large oak tree 5 feet away. The father stood up, called Leo's name, and walked around the tree. Nothing. He asked his daughter if she saw where her brother went. She hadn't looked up from her book. The father's annoyance shifted into a mild panic. He began walking in wider circles. The meadow was flat grass. The tree line was roughly 30 yards away. A 4-year-old boy simply cannot run 30 yards in 18 seconds without making a sound or catching the eye of the dozens of other tourists in the area. Within 10 minutes, the mild panic turned into absolute, crushing horror. The parents were screaming Leo's name. Other tourists joined the search. They combed the meadow, checked the parking lot, and scoured the public restrooms. Leo had vanished. By 2 p.m., Yosemite's search and rescue was fully mobilized. The park rangers locked down the exit roads, assuming a potential abduction. But eyewitness testimonies confirmed no suspicious vehicles had left, and nobody had seen a child being carried away. The dogs were brought in at 3:30 p.m. 3 highly decorated bloodhounds were given the boy's jacket to scent. This is where the case breaks the laws of reality. The dogs were brought to the exact patch of grass where Leo was last seen playing with his toy truck. Normally, a dog will pick up a scent trail and immediately pull on the leash, following the invisible chemical path left by the victim's skin cells and sweat. But these 3 dogs did not pull. When they reached the spot, all 3 dogs exhibited extreme signs of distress. They tucked their tails between their legs. The hair on their backs stood straight up. They began to whine, and then, in unison, they lay flat on their stomachs and refused to move. The handlers tried to pull them toward the tree line. The dogs fought against the leashes, their paws scrabbling in the dirt, desperate to get away from the area. The lead SAR coordinator noted in his classified log, "The canine units did not lose the scent. They acted as if the scent went straight up in the air." Furthermore, the animals exhibited severe fear responses to the last seen point, indicating the presence of an apex predator. But there were no tracks, no blood, and no signs of a struggle. For 7 agonizing days, the largest search operation in Yosemite's recent history tore the park apart. Helicopters flew grid patterns until they ran out of fuel. Dive teams scoured the nearby rivers. Over 300 people walked shoulder to shoulder through the dense forests. Nothing. The mother had a nervous breakdown and had to be hospitalized. The father refused to sleep, wandering the woods at night, screaming his son's name until his vocal cords physically bled. On the morning of the 8th day, the official search was transitioning into a recovery mission. A 4-year-old cannot survive 7 freezing nights in the Sierra Nevada mountains without food, water, or proper clothing. It is biologically impossible. But at 11 a.m., a radio call came in on an encrypted SAR frequency. It wasn't from a search team. It was from a pair of elite, professional free climbers who were scaling a massive, sheer granite wall on the completely opposite side of the park. The cliff face they were climbing is known as the Erasure. It is a 3,000-foot vertical drop of smooth, unforgiving stone. It requires thousands of dollars in technical gear, ropes, pitons, and days of exhausting physical labor for adult experts to conquer. The climbers were currently resting on a tiny 2-foot-wide stone ledge 2,500 feet up the vertical wall. When the lead climber radioed the ranger station, his voice was trembling so hard the dispatcher could barely understand him. "Yosemite Dispatch, this is Sierra Team 2, the climber said, the wind howling in the background. "We are on the north face of the Erasure, elevation 6,500 feet. We have a visual on a child." The dispatcher paused. "Repeat, Sierra 2? You have a visual on what?" "A little boy. He is sitting on a ledge about 40 feet above us. He is wearing a red shirt and blue jeans." It was Leo. The logistics of this discovery sent shockwaves through the command center. The Erasure was exactly 14 miles away from the meadow where Leo vanished. Between the meadow and the cliff were 3 raging rivers, miles of impenetrable dense forest and deep ravines. It would have taken a fit adult several days to hike that distance. But even if a 4-year-old miraculously survived the hike, crossed the rivers, and navigated the forest in the dark, how did he climb 2,500 feet up a sheer vertical wall of smooth glass-like rock? A military rescue chopper was immediately dispatched. The pilot had to perform highly dangerous maneuvers, hovering just feet away from the cliff face, dropping a harness down to a rescue specialist who swung onto the ledge. When the specialist reached the boy, he expected to find a corpse, or at best, a child suffering from severe hypothermia, dehydration, and massive physical trauma. Instead, he found Leo sitting calmly with his legs dangling off the edge of a 3,000-foot drop. The boy looked up at the rescue specialist and smiled. He was not dehydrated, he was not shivering, there was not a single scratch on his arms or face. But the detail that made the rescue specialist's blood run cold, the detail that was immediately classified and scrubbed from the public record, was Leo's shoes. After allegedly walking 14 miles through mud, rivers, and dirt, and scaling a granite mountain, the soles of Leo's tiny sneakers were perfectly, immaculately clean. Not a single speck of dirt. It was as if he had been picked up from the grass in the meadow, held in the air for 7 days, and gently placed down on that ledge an hour before the climbers found him. But the true horror of Incident 44 didn't come from the physical impossibilities. It came from the psychological evaluation of the child after he was reunited with his parents.
When a child goes through a traumatic event, especially a week-long exposure to the wilderness, their brain usually represses the memory. They cry, they exhibit severe separation anxiety, and they shut down. Leo did none of those things. When the child psychologist sat down with the 4-year-old in the sterile, brightly lit hospital room, Leo was perfectly calm. He was drawing with crayons. The official transcript of this interview was locked behind federal red tape, but leaked excerpts paint a picture of pure psychological horror. The psychologist gently asked Leo how he got so far away from his mommy and daddy. Leo didn't look up from his drawing. He simply said, "The other daddy carried me." The psychologist, assuming the boy meant a male rescue worker, asked him to describe the man. "He looked exactly like my daddy," Leo said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any childlike emotion. "He had his shirt, he had his face, but he was too tall. His head touched the branches. The psychologist pressed further, asking how the man carried him up the mountain. Leo finally stopped drawing. He looked the doctor dead in the eyes and delivered a sentence that caused the entire psychological evaluation to be immediately classified. He didn't climb. His legs bent backward like a dog. He just jumped. And when we were in the sky, he told me that if I ever cried, he would take my skin. Leo's case was officially closed by the Park Service as a miraculous survival. The media hailed it as a story of human resilience. But every veteran search and rescue officer in Yosemite knows the chilling truth. A 4-year-old boy did not survive the elements. He was taken by an apex mimic predator, something that wears our faces to lure us away from the safety of the herd. And for whatever terrifying reason, the entity decided it didn't want him. It put him back on a shelf 3,000 feet in the air. Leo was returned, but in our next classified file, the victim was not so lucky. Because sometimes, the grid breakers don't just take you physically, they erase you from the spectrum entirely.
If the vastness of the wilderness is our greatest fear, then technology is our ultimate comfort blanket. We believe that if we have a GPS, a satellite phone, and thermal imaging, we are invincible. You cannot hide from a thermal camera. Forward-looking infrared technology doesn't see light or shadows. It sees the raw, undeniable radiation of heat. A living human body glows like a blinding white sun on a FLIR monitor, even in pitch-black darkness through dense fog and miles of forest canopy. In late 2021, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park relied heavily on this technology. The park is a massive, ancient temperate rainforest. The canopy is so thick that sunlight barely touches the forest floor. When someone goes missing here, ground searches are agonizingly slow. On November 12th, a 28-year-old experienced solo hiker named Elena failed to check in at her designated exit point. By nightfall, a severe storm rolled in, dropping temperatures and making ground search nearly impossible. The command center deployed their Eye in the Sky, a high-altitude, military-grade drone equipped with a state-of-the-art FLIR camera operated by a veteran contractor we will call Viper. Viper was sitting in a climate-controlled command van miles away, watching a high-definition monitor. The screen was black and gray, showing the cold, dead landscape of the forest from 1,000 feet up. At exactly 2:14 a.m., Viper got a hit. "Command, this is Viper," he said into his headset, his fingers rapidly typing on the console to lock the coordinates. "I have a solid thermal signature, Sector 4, roughly 3 miles off the marked trail. It's a human profile." On the screen, surrounded by the cold, dark gray of the ancient forest, was a brilliant white silhouette. It was Elena. She was sitting at the base of a massive ancient oak tree, her knees pulled up to her chest, trying to conserve body heat. She was alive. "Copy that, Viper," the ground commander replied. "We are mobilizing Team Alpha. ETA to those coordinates is 20 minutes. Viper leaned back in his chair. The hard part was over. Now he just had to keep the camera locked on her until the rescue team arrived. He zoomed in, the powerful lens capturing the subtle movements of Elena's chest rising and falling as she breathed. But as Viper watched the monitor, a cold knot formed in Viper's stomach. Something on the screen was wrong. FLIR cameras show heat as white and cold as black. The massive oak tree Elena was leaning against was dead, cold wood, registering as a dark solid gray shape behind her glowing white outline. But as Viper stared at the screen, the dark gray trunk of the tree began to move. "Command," Viper whispered, leaning closer to the monitor, his heart rate suddenly spiking. "Be advised, the victim is not alone." Viper watched in absolute horror as a shape literally peeled itself away from the bark of the tree. It was a second entity. But it was impossible. Firstly, the size of it.
Compared to Elena's thermal outline, this new figure was easily 9 feet tall. Its limbs were unnaturally elongated, its arms hanging past what would be its knees. Secondly, and far more terrifying, was its thermal signature. It wasn't glowing white like a living mammal. It wasn't gray like the ambient background. It was absolute pitch black. It was a walking void. It was an entity so impossibly cold that it was actively absorbing the ambient heat around it. "Viper, repeat," the radio crackled. "What is the status of the second individual?" Viper couldn't speak. The primal terror of the uncanny valley had paralyzed his vocal cords. He was watching a nightmare unfold live in high definition from 1,000 feet in the air, completely helpless to stop it. On the monitor, the towering black void slowly stepped toward the glowing white shape of Elena. Elena didn't seem to notice it. She didn't look up. It was as if the entity existed outside of her physical perception. The tall black figure stood directly over her. It slowly raised a massive, elongated arm with too many joints. "Team Alpha, run!" Viper finally screamed into his microphone, shattering the discipline of the command center. "Run! Get to her now!" But they were still 15 minutes away. On the monitor, the black entity gently placed its hand on top of Elena's head. If a human dies of exposure in the woods, their thermal signature doesn't disappear immediately. It takes hours for a warm body to cool down to the ambient temperature of the forest. The bright white shape slowly fades to gray over a long period of time. But that is not what happened on Viper's screen. The exact millisecond the black, freezing entity touched Elena, her bright white thermal signature flickered violently and then was instantly deleted. She didn't cool down, she didn't run away. The massive amount of thermal energy contained in a living human body was simply switched off, like a light bulb being unplugged from the wall. The monitor in Viper's command van instantly dissolved into violent, shrieking static. The drone's multi-million-dollar sensor suite had been completely fried. When Team Alpha reached the exact GPS coordinates 14 minutes later, with weapons drawn and flashlights cutting through the fog, they found absolute silence. The massive oak tree was there, but there was no sign of Elena. Her backpack, her flashlight, her footprints, everything was gone. The ground around the base of the tree wasn't even disturbed. She was never seen again. The Park Service officially ruled Elena's case as lost in the wilderness, presumed drowned in a nearby river. Viper was forced to sign a massive non-disclosure agreement by federal agents the following morning. The corrupted drone footage was confiscated and locked in a vault that does not exist on any official public record.
We build our cities out of concrete and steel. We surround ourselves with screens, cameras, and thermal sensors, convincing ourselves that we have conquered the dark. We look at a map of a national park and see a designated playground. But the classified files of the grid breakers tell a different, terrifying story. They prove that there are ancient, impossible things living just past the tree line, things that operate entirely outside the laws of our physics. Entities that can freeze time in an 18-second window to pluck a child from a crowded meadow. Voids that can reach out from the dark and erase a human life from the physical spectrum with a single touch, leaving nothing behind but silence. The National Park Service will tell you to stay on the marked trail. They will tell you to carry a topographic map, a compass, and extra water. They will give you a list of survival tips for bear encounters or sudden storms. But they will never tell you what to do when the wind suddenly stops. They will never tell you what to do when the birds go completely, unnaturally silent and the air pressure drops. Because they know the absolute truth. When the dead silence falls in the deep woods, you are no longer a hiker. You are prey.
If these classified national park cases made your blood run cold, prove you survived this video by hitting that like button right now. It feeds the algorithm and tells YouTube that the Prince of Darkness army is growing. If you want to uncover the most terrifying, documented, and classified mysteries on Earth, subscribe and turn on all notifications. We go where others are too afraid to look. Now I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and give me your theory. What took a 4-year-old boy up a 3,000-foot vertical cliff, and what was the towering black void that erased Elena from the thermal camera? Let me know. I read every single comment. Until next time, keep your doors locked, and if you go into the deep woods, never look behind you. Good night.